Hello, I'm Kathy McClear, State Director for AARP Minnesota, and I want to thank you for joining us for this interactive telephone town hall tonight. With the general election just a few weeks away on November 5th, we want to make sure you know how to cast your ballot in this very important election. And I want to stress again that word how. We are not here tonight to tell you who to vote for. We are here to make sure you have the information you need to be able to cast your ballot. You can find out more information on the when, where, and how to vote by visiting our state election guide at aarp.org/MN-vote. Now, here at AARP, we take our nonprofit, nonpartisan stance very seriously, and we are in your corner fighting for the issues that matter to you, including protecting your hard-earned Social Security and finding common sense solutions to help Minnesota's family caregivers save time and money and provide them with more support. Now, if you've ever participated in one of our telephone town halls before, you know that they're a lot like a radio call-in show where you have the opportunity to ask questions. So if you have questions about the upcoming election and how to cast your ballot this election, press *3 on your telephone keypad to be connected with an AARP staff member. We'll take as many questions as we can during our time together tonight. So if you have a question about voting in the upcoming election, please press *3 to join the conversation. And for those of you watching on Facebook or YouTube, please post your comments or questions in the comment section. Now tonight we have a very special guest with us for this event. This is the person who's responsible for administering our state elections, Secretary of State Steve Simon. We're so grateful for you for joining us tonight, so welcome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Kathy. And I want to thank AARP, its membership, and especially the people tonight who are with us on this town hall meeting. This is not my first rodeo, so to speak. I've been here a number of times before, and I always appreciate the opportunity, particularly in the period immediately before the election, just to clarify the rules. And I'm so happy that you mentioned kind of the ground rules here. We, in our office, share the same sentiment with AARP. It is never our place to tell someone how to vote. It is never our place to talk about candidates or political parties or anything of the sort. With 35 days left to go, it's really important to us that all eligible Minnesota voters, regardless of background, regardless of zip code, regardless of their political orientation, that they have the tools that they need in order to cast a ballot. And so I hope tonight we'll have a good dialogue, have some good questions, maybe provide some new information that some folks didn't know about about how we vote. It's only 35 days. It's going to be an intense time. I like to say that our office, because we oversee the Minnesota election system, I like to say that we are in the democracy business. Well, tonight, all of us who are participating are in the democracy business. I think we all want the same thing. We want an election that is fair, accurate, honest, and secure. And part of that depends upon eligible voters knowing the score, knowing the right information so that they can cast their ballots. So thanks to AARP once again for this great opportunity.
Well, and we know folks are going to have a lot of questions tonight. So as a reminder, if you would like to ask Secretary Simon a question, you can press *3 on your telephone keypad. *3 will get you into our system. You'll be connected with an AARP staff member. They'll take your name and where you're located from and just a brief synopsis of your question, and then we'll get you into the queue and on air with Secretary Simon. And we're going to try to answer as many of those questions as we can during our time together. So again, if you have questions about voting in the upcoming election, press *3 to join the conversation. Now, we know that voters 50 plus decide elections, and they are the majority of the voters in every election. And in Minnesota, 1.4 million voters 50 and older cast their ballots in the 2022 elections. And that makes up about 28% of the electorate. The November 5th election is your opportunity to make your voice heard. So again, we are here today to make sure that you have the information you need to be able to cast your ballot. So again, if you would like to ask a question, this is an interactive call. This really relies on you, and we do want to hear from you and hear what's on your mind about the upcoming election and your questions about where, when, or how to cast your ballot. Please press *3 on your telephone keypad, and we'll get you into that conversation. So as a reminder, for more than 40 years, AARP has worked very hard during elections to provide information to our members and the public on the where, when, and how to vote, as well as candidates' positions on our policy priorities. What we do not do, we do not endorse candidates or elected officials. We do not give money to PACs or elected officials, or we do not tell you who to vote for. But what we do, we raise visibility on the issues that matter to people 50 plus. We work across political lines, and we inform candidates about those issues that matter most to the 50 and older. And we provide factual information on the where, when, and how to vote. So before we start taking those questions, I know you want to hear from Secretary Simon. Press *3 on your telephone keypad. We want to hear something from you. We want to find out how you're planning on casting your ballot in the upcoming election. Will you be voting by mail? Will you be voting early at an in-person location? Or do you plan to vote in person at a polling location on Election Day? So hit number one on your telephone keypad if you plan to vote by mail. Press number 2 if you plan to use early voting at an in-person location, and press 3 on your telephone keypad if you plan to vote in person on Election Day. And we'll share those results a little bit later. So again, press 1 for voting by mail, 2 for voting early in person, or press 3 for voting at your polling location on Election Day. All right, we want to get to some of those questions coming up. And in order to take those questions live, I'm going to bring on Erin Parrish, my colleague here at AARP, who will be helping us moderate this call tonight and get some of those questions to Secretary Simon. Erin, do we have any callers?
We do, Kathy. Our first caller is from Mary, who has a question about the ballot and about ballots and mail. Mary, go ahead with your question. You're live.
We have not gotten our ballots in the mail yet, and I'm worried about that. We've always voted by mail because we're elderly and we don't have a vehicle. So why are they delayed, or is it just because we live in Becker County and the mail service is so erratic and bad out here in White Earth?
Oh, Mary, that's a great question. I'm going to ask Secretary Simon to answer that.
And thank you, Kathy. We get those questions quite frequently, particularly now. Mary, as you know, we're in the early voting period right now. We're about a week and a half into it. Now, I don't think there's any cause at this point to be overly concerned. I think a lot of people do hope and expect that they get that ballot right away, maybe on day 1 or day 2 or day 4 of the early voting period. But I would guess, if, as you say, that you've already ordered it, I would guess you're not going to have a delay of that much longer. I would guess that within a week or so, you're most likely going to get that. Interestingly, you mentioned postal issues, Mary. I was just on a call today with a number of other secretaries of state and the U.S. Postmaster General, the top person at the Postal Service, where we discussed, among other things, postal delays. And we want assurances that in this final 35 days, people who vote by mail can sort of rest assured that their ballot's going to get there on time. And Mary, even though you didn't ask this, I'm going to say to you, and by way of you, everyone who's listening or participating today, that on the other end, once you receive your ballot, and I'm quite confident you will soon, we're telling people, no matter where they live, to give yourself at least a week, maybe more than a week, to send it back. Because remember, in Minnesota, the rule is your ballot has to arrive by Election Day. There are some states, California and others, where they have a different rule, like a postmark rule. As long as it's postmarked by Election Day, that's okay. That's not our rule. Our rule in Minnesota is the ballot has to arrive by Election Day. That means either by mail or by hand delivery, or, Mary, another option for you or anyone on this town hall is you can have someone hand deliver it for you. So I just wanted to get that out of the way because these mail issues can be tricky. But the bottom line, Mary, is I think I strongly suspect that you're going to get the ballot soon, with plenty of time to get it back by Election Day.
So that was a great question by Mary. If you have a question for Secretary Simon, please press *3 on your telephone keypad, or if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, you can put those questions in the comments. Before we go to another caller, that's great. Mary was on top of it. She's already requested her ballot. For somebody who does want to vote by mail, how can they request that ballot to do that by mail?
Yes, great question. There are multiple ways that you can request that ballot to come to you, and it's by no means too late. So if you aren't sure yet, and just maybe today you decided you want to do that, you're perfectly within the right time frame right now. So one way to do it is to go to our website, and that web address is mnvotes.gov. That's MN like Minnesota, votes, VOTES.gov. The other thing you can do is call our office, and that number is 877 600 VOTE. That's 877 600 VOTE or 8683. Or you can go to your city or county and contact them and get a ballot from them. Depending on where you live, either or both would gladly furnish you that ballot. So there are multiple ways to do it.
All right. We know we have lots more folks wanting to ask questions. We'll get to Aaron in just a second. We did have a question from someone who couldn't stay on the call, and they want to know what do you need to have to be considered eligible to vote?
Great question. Well, as I'm sure many people on this town hall know, in Minnesota and everywhere else I'm aware in this country, you have to register to vote before you vote. And I think too often there's a lot of mystery around that term, voter registration. It doesn't really, the word doesn't convey what it is. The good news in Minnesota is it's very simple. Registration only means two things, not 20, not 8, 2. It just means you have to show that you are who you say you are and you live where you say you live, period. That's it. And the good news in Minnesota is we have a long list of items that you can use to show either or both of those things. Sure, it could be a driver's license, but not everyone has one of those. And even if you have one that's expired or one that doesn't reflect your current address where you're living now, you can use that certainly for the you are who you say you are part. On the you live where you say you live part, again, a long list that you can call our office or go to our website to see, but I'll give you an example. We have a very helpful feature in Minnesota law called vouching, which means on the you live where you say you live part, you can have a neighbor, someone who lives in your precinct, basically a cluster of neighborhoods, and that person can swear an oath under penalty of perjury that, yes, you do live at 123 Maple Street or the like. And so there's a broad array and list of things that you can use to demonstrate one or both of those items. And once you're registered to vote, you're good to go. And just as a refresher, the basic eligibility criteria in Minnesota are you have to be 18 years of age or older, you have to be a citizen of the United States, you have to be a resident of the state of Minnesota, which means lying your head in the state for 20 days or more, and you can't be currently serving a felony sentence in incarceration. Those are the basic rules. And if you meet that description, then you're eligible to vote.
Wonderful. And people still have time to register if they haven't registered yet.
Not only do they have time to register, but Minnesota, if I can brag, was one of the earliest states 50 plus years ago to adopt same-day voter registration. So unlike most states in America, even today in 2024, Minnesota is one of only 15 or 16 states that says you can vote all the way up to and including Election Day. So if someone has never registered before, or more likely, someone has registered, but maybe they moved, or they had a name change, or for whatever reason they need to do it again, you can walk into that polling place on game day, so to speak, on Election Day, November 5th this year, and you can register right there. There's no pre-election cutoff. It's up to and including Election Day.
Wonderful. All right, let's get more questions into the Secretary. Press *3 on your telephone keypad if you would like to ask a question about voting in the upcoming election. Let's go back to Aaron and see who else we have on the line today. Aaron?
Kathy, next we have Diane, who's in Ham Lake and has a question about partisanship at the polling place. Diane, go ahead. You are live.
Hi, and thank you very much. When you go in person to vote on Election Day, does Minnesota require there be a Democrat and a Republican there to kind of keep things on the up and up?
Yes. Thank you, Diane. Yes, the answer is yes. We have a party balance requirement in the polling place. Some of you may know, but it bears repeating, that we call our poll workers in Minnesota election judges. That's the name we give. A little odd when you think about it. They're not judges. They don't wear black robes. They don't have gavels in their hand. But that's the name we've used for a long, long time. So the election judges, there is a party balance requirement. That doesn't mean it has to be equal party representation. But Diane, as you sort of alluded to, there has to be at least a minimum of each of the major parties. And so that ensures some fairness. And in fact, there are some particular tasks that can only be done in the polling place if there's at least one Democrat and at least one Republican. And let me give you an example, because this might affect some folks on this town hall meeting. We in Minnesota, fortunately, have a convenience in voting that allows people to drive up to the polling place, park in front of the polling place, and have the election judges come out and deliver the ballot to you. We call it curbside voting. And you don't have to give a reason or an explanation. Maybe it's an illness, maybe it's a disability of some kind, or maybe you just want to do it because you want to do it. There's no test. So if you want to do that, you can have the ballot brought to your vehicle. Now that's an example where under state law, that process can only be performed by one Democrat and one Republican. And you can understand why. You wouldn't want one election judge of a particular persuasion somehow influencing the person in the vehicle. So you've got both people's eyes watching one another, and that's a good balance that we have.
Fascinating. I learned something today. That's very interesting. Speaking of how people are going to vote, we asked a poll just a bit earlier to get a sense of who was on the call and how those folks might be voting. And we had 17% who responded to our poll saying that they were going to be voting by mail. 14% said that they would be voting at an in-person, early voting at an in-person location. And the majority, 69%, said that they planned on voting on Election Day in person. So little reflection on that. Is that what we see at the state level, or does that surprise you, or is that kind of the way things tend to go?
That's fascinating, really interesting to me. You know, the last presidential election, remember, was during COVID. That was a tough time for a lot of us. It was a really fraught time and even scary time for a lot of people. That year, for some of the obvious reasons, there was a massive increase in the number of people, really of all ages, who wanted to vote by mail, because people didn't want to go to places where a lot of other folks were congregating. Then in 2022, we saw that number come way back down to earth as things sort of returned to more or less normal. So what I'm hearing here is something that's more or less normal. Interestingly, the last time in 2022, it was about 26% statewide, 26% who chose to vote early or absentee, either by mail or voting in person. So this seems not too far off from that. According to this poll, about 31%, if I'm doing my math correctly, are in that category. That's not too far afield of what we saw last election and what we might expect this election.
Great. Well, I know we have lots more questions. Press *3 on your telephone keypad if you're listening. Go ahead and put your question in comments on Facebook or YouTube if you have a question, if you're watching online today. Again, *3 to get put into our queue. And I think Aaron has a question from Facebook. Aaron, what's the question from Facebook coming in?
Kathy, one of our questions from our Facebook viewers is about write-in candidates. And their question is, if they write in a candidate who's not registered as a write-in, will that invalidate their ballot so the remainder of the votes that they cast don't count?
The answer is no. That will not invalidate your ballot. And just to zoom out for a little bit, because maybe not everyone is familiar with the rule, the questioner certainly is, but I want to make sure everyone is. Every write-in vote counts, period. It doesn't matter who you write in. It can be a real person. It could be a cartoon character. They all count as votes. I just want to be very clear about that. But there is a rule in Minnesota, which this questioner knows about, which says that if a candidate wants their name separately itemized, in other words, when they announce the total, it wouldn't just be 123 write-ins. It would be 110 write-ins and 13 for John Doe in particular. If they want their name specifically itemized, there's certain paperwork that they have to file with our office. So the questioner, I think, was getting at, what if you write in someone who has not done that? You write in a person who didn't come to our office and say, hey, please separately track who wrote in an election for me. And the answer is no. A vote is a vote is a vote. Doesn't matter whether you vote for a person who's registered, Mickey Mouse, anyone else. That will be counted as a vote, period.
We have smart people asking questions tonight. Yeah. Aaron, I know we have more folks that have questions for the Secretary. Who do we have next?
Next, we have Julian Shoreview, who has a question about who's on the ballot. Julie, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Sure. Sure. My question is, we're what website can I use to look at a sample ballot? There's candidates on there, like judges that I want to vote for the one I want, and and I don't know if there's any amendments on the ballot this year, or I just want to see one before I go to vote.
Great question, Julie. Answer is?
Thanks a lot, Julie. We have a feature, it just so happens, on our website. If you go to mnvotes.gov, it's called My Vote. And if you go to that website, My Vote, you can type in your address, and up will come a sample ballot for the area that you live in. So I get this all the time. People who say in a year like this, for example, well, of course, I know we're voting for the presidency, but are we voting for county commissioner in my area this year? Are we voting for the state legislature? What else is on the ballot? So if you type in your address in the My Vote feature, up will come a sample ballot. It will show every contest in the place where you're voting and every candidate in those contests and a link to their website if they have one. Not every candidate does at the local level, but if they have one, we will link to it. And that's a great start. You can get information about the candidates. Of course, if you're going to a candidate website, you're going to hear all the great things and none of the bad things, but at least it's the candidate in their own words, and it's maybe a start of a larger process of looking up information on the candidates.
Some of those ballots can get pretty long. So can you print out the ballot? Can you bring that practice ballot with you to your polling location?
Yeah, that's a great follow-up. Thank you for that. Yes, you can bring whatever you want in the polling place. I like to say that the voting experience is like an open book exam. You can bring anything you want. If you want to bring an encyclopedia with you into the voting booth, great. Have at it. If you can carry it, you can do it. No one can restrict any document, notes, anything. So yes, you can print out that ballot and you can bring that and anything you want into the polling place.
That's great. As a reminder, if you are maybe just joining this call or caught us midway through the conversation, I'm Kathy McClear. I'm the State Director for AARP Minnesota, and I'm here with Secretary of State Steve Simon. We are talking about the upcoming election, the where, when, and how to vote, not who to vote for, just all the particulars so that you can cast your ballot with confidence in the upcoming election. And we do want to take your questions and comments regarding the election, so you can hit *3 on your telephone keypad at any time to be put into the queue to ask Secretary of State Simon your questions. It looks like we do have a few more folks on the line, so let's go back to Erin and see who else we have.
Great. Our next caller is from Robert in Lakeville, and he has a question about folks needing accessible options for voting. Robert, go ahead. You are live.
Yep. Secretary of State Simon, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What kind of help could I get when I'm voting for filling out the ballot?
Absolutely. Thank you, Robert. The answer is you can bring anyone of your choosing, if you want to, anyone of your choosing into the ballot box, into the polling place with you to help you fill out the ballot physically. So that's your right. You get to choose. No one gets to choose for you. If there's someone in particular you want to bring in, that's your right and your choice. But let me add on or tack on to that something else. By federal law, every single precinct, every single polling place in America, not just Minnesota, has to have assistive voting technology. That's a mouthful. It means a particular piece of voting equipment that can accommodate voters with a disability, whether that's a sight impairment, a hearing impairment, anything else. And they have to be kept up to speed, and they have to be maintained just like any other piece of equipment. And by the way, any voter can use it. Again, there's no test or whether someone is sufficiently or disabled or anything like that. Any one of us who's eligible to vote can use that equipment in the polling place. So that needs to be there. It's required to be there. And that's another option in addition to having someone help any person out to fill out the ballot.
Yeah. Great questions again. All night we've had great questions. If you have a question for Secretary of State Steve Simon, please press *3 on your telephone keypad and we will get to your question just as soon as we can. A little follow-up to that one. If you maybe have a loved one who may be in an assisted living facility or a nursing home who wants to cast their ballot, how do those individuals make sure their voice is heard?
Yep, that's a great point. So there are a variety of ways to do it. One is that person could have a trusted person, a relative, a friend, someone else help them fill out the ballot just like you could in the polling place. So that's one way. Another thing is that we frequently have local units of government in Minnesota, cities, counties, and townships who send people into assisted living or nursing home environments to help people fill out the ballot. Again, not telling them who to vote for, not telling them where their political sympathies might lie, but literally helping them execute the task of filling out the ballot and voting in whatever contest they want. So that, the control lies with the voter. The voter can determine whether they need that assistance. The voter can determine whether they want to have a person come in and help them vote an absentee ballot. The voter can determine whether they're doing it by mail or in person. So it really is a voter-centered exercise, but we have good rules in place in Minnesota to make sure that every eligible voter who wants to vote can have their voice heard.
Wonderful. All right, hit *3 on your telephone keypad. You'll be connected with Secretary of State Simon to ask your questions about the upcoming election and the how, when, and where to vote. Erin, let's go to another caller. Who do we have?
Sure. We actually have someone who was unable to stay on the call, but her question was, she's new to Minnesota. So as a new resident to the state, what does she have to do to find out where to vote?
Yeah, where is your voting precinct? That's a good one.
Right. It's a frequent question. So a couple ways to do that. One is to, again, go to our website, which is mnvotes.gov, and you'll see right there, it says in big letters, find my polling place. And it's as simple as entering the particular address, and up will pop that polling place. With other information, by the way. The other information would be, what ward you're in, or what congressional district you're in, or what other sort of district you might be in, depending on the office. So it's helpful information. That's one way to do it. For those who don't care to use the website, again, you can always call our election line, which is 877-600-VOTE. 877-600-VOTE. The last four digits of VOTE are 8683.
Wonderful. All right, well, we're getting a few more folks in the queue, and if you would like to ask a question about the upcoming election, hit *3 on your telephone keypad, and we'll get you in the queue, and we'll get to your question just as soon as we can. But I know this is a big one that's on everyone's mind right now, is the integrity of the election. So what does your office do to make sure that we have integrity and security in our elections here in Minnesota?
That is a huge responsibility of our office. We want to make sure that we're always balancing two major things: access and security. Access meaning, hey, let's not make voting an obstacle course. Let's make it easy. Let's make it simple for eligible voters. But security means let's make sure that only eligible voters and nobody else is voting in our elections. So let me give you one example, maybe just to hone in on one: voting by mail. Some people have questioned the security or the integrity of that process. In Minnesota, we have 3 layers of security. Almost no other state has that many layers or the kinds of layers we have. So when somebody orders an absentee ballot, and some of you may know this if you've done it before, you have to provide some personal identifying information. It can be part of a social security number, it can be a driver's license, whatever it is, it's got to be something that pertains and belongs only to you. And the voter has to sign the ballot, and the voter has to get a witness to sign the ballot. So sometimes I get this question. Someone will say, how on earth can this be secure? I mean, you're sending out hundreds and hundreds of thousands, maybe over 1 million blank ballots in the mail. They're blank. They're out there for the taking. What's to prevent some mailbox thief from hanging out in the neighborhood and stealing 10 or 100 of these things and voting these blank ballots out there? The answer is that only if that mailbox thief knew the precise form of personal identifying information that the voter used when they ordered it, and that mailbox thief forged the signature of the voter, and the mailbox thief forged the signature of the voter's witness. Only if all three of those things happened could that person be successful in their scheme. And I think that's the reason why, after 9 years of doing this job, I can't recall a single case in the state of Minnesota, not one, of that kind of crime. We have triple layers of security. It is safe. It is secure. You can really take it to the bank.
Okay. I think lots of folks want to know that.
Okay.
If you want to know anything else about the upcoming election, if you have questions for Secretary Simon, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. We'll get those questions right in. And let's go to another caller. Erin, do we have another caller?
We do. Our next caller is Betty, who's in Wadena, who has a question about early voting. Betty, go ahead with your question. You are live.
Okay, I want to know that when we or anybody all votes in advance, is the information on who we voted for and everything recorded so that they know whether we're Republicans, Democrats, or whatever? Or is that all concealed until election?
Okay. Thanks, Betty. So as I understand it, you want to know that your choices were accurately cast. I think that's
what she's.
I think that's what she's saying. Well, so it's always a sort of a push-pull. We have a secret ballot in this country, right? It is absolutely private. It is absolutely anonymous and secret, which means once it's counted and cast, it can't be traced to you. But let me tell you why we know that when you cast a vote for candidate A, it will be counted for candidate A and not candidate B, C, D, or E. When you send in that mail ballot, it has to go to something called an absentee ballot board. And I don't want to bore you with all the bureaucratic stuff, except to say there is party balance required on that absentee ballot board. It's what it sounds like. It's a board, typically a small group of people, who literally in a room look at every single absentee ballot that comes in to make sure that it's been done correctly. They don't look at who voted for whom, but they look to see if it is done correctly. Was there a signature? Was there a witness, etc.? And only if everyone agrees does it go to the next step. And there, under the watchful eyes of a lot of people, it is removed from the envelope and put in the pile. So if the worry is that someone would tamper along the way, kind of a chain of custody issue, I can assure you we have party balance requirements and processes that make sure when you send it in, it is checked for the accuracy of whether it was filled out correctly, not who voted for whom, and then immediately under the watchful eyes of multiple people, put in the pile to be counted. Plus, I would just add, Betty, remember, we're a paper ballot state. We don't push keys on a keyboard. We vote with good old-fashioned paper, which means at the end of the day, you can reconcile, you can match up the votes cast and spit out by the machine with the actual paper. Now, it's not going to say Betty voted for so-and-so because that's private and secret and an anonymous ballot, but the whole number is going to be reconciled against what the machine counted. So we always have that paper backup, and we have to keep those paper ballots for 2 years under federal law, under lock and key, and we do.
Wonderful. What we haven't gotten to tonight is if you are voting in person, when do those polls open? When do they close? What do you need to know about that?
So 13 hours in Minnesota, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And remember, if you're at the place at 8, if you're in line, or if you arrived by 8 p.m., you're still good to go. So if you don't actually end up voting till 8:09 or 8:15, that's okay. If you get there by 8, that's fine. And maybe this is an opportunity for me to say as well that all the ballots you made that were ordered beforehand from people who wanted to vote from home, those have to be back by the close of voting hours at 8 p.m. as well. And again, I'll just remind you, we're telling folks to give yourself at least a week to mail it back. And there's always the option to either hand deliver it or have someone you know and trust hand deliver it for you. But remember, it's got to get back by the close of polls at 8 p.m. So 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., 13 hours.
All right. We talked a little bit earlier. You can get a sample ballot to see what is on that, what you're voting for in your precinct.
Right.
It might depend on which district you're in or your municipality. Are there other races in Minnesota ballot other than the presidential primary race this year?
Yes. Oh, yes. There is a long list of contests. So the ones that we all have in common in Minnesota, regardless of where we live, are the presidency of the United States, obviously, the United States Senate, and then a number of contests for Minnesota Supreme Court and Court of Appeals. We all have that in common, regardless of zip code, regardless of town or city, we all have that. Then, of course, it breaks down a little bit further. So depending on which one of our 8 congressional districts we live in, everyone will be voting for the U.S. House of Representatives because that's up every 2 years. Similarly, the Minnesota House of Representatives is up every 2 years, so everyone will be voting on that, depending on which of the 134 state House districts you live in. And then from there, it gets a little bit more varied. Some places will be voting for county commissioner, others not. Some people will be voting for, well, only one place will be, there's one state senate special election and so forth. So there it gets a little bit more granular and detailed. So there are a few that we all have in common, but most, frankly, we don't have in common with one another, or all of us don't at least. So again, the place to go to find out what's on your ballot is mnvotes.gov. It's the My Ballot feature on that website. Or again, you can call our office and some of our staff at our call center can assist you. That number again is 877-600-VOTE, 877-600-VOTE, or 8683.
Great resource. I do believe we still have a couple folks ready to ask questions. Let's go back to Erin and see who we have on the line.
Yes, our next question comes from Tammy in Ham Lake, who has questions about ID and voting. Tammy, go ahead, you're live.
Hi. In regard to the integrity of the elections, I wonder what would be wrong with requiring voters to show a state-issued ID to prove that they actually are eligible to vote in the state of Minnesota. I know there's some controversy about that, and I'm not sure I understand what would be wrong with requiring that.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. Well, it sort of depends how you do it. You may recall, or some of the other folks here may recall, that a few years ago, this was put to a vote in Minnesota. There was a proposed constitutional amendment to do just that, required a government issued photo ID, and voters said no to that, and not by a small margin. And I think the reason was there are many understandable reasons for wanting something like that, but I think people concluded, at least as to that specific proposal, that the more you look, the less you like. And let me give you an example of that. So when I was in the state legislature, which was my job before I had this job, I used to go to senior and assisted living facilities, and I would always do an informal poll. And I would say, how many people in this room, and we had some pretty big packed rooms, how many people in this room have a government issued photo ID that corresponds with this address, the one you live in now, not the home maybe you moved from a year or two ago? And I don't think I ever got to 50%. So the unintended consequence might be, and it all depends how you do it, that you might inadvertently shut out a lot of people who are eligible voters. They're citizens of this country. They're 18. They're residents of Minnesota. They've been voting for years or decades, but they don't have that piece of paper. Our system says, as I mentioned earlier in connection with voter registration, that you do have to show, you must show that you are who you say you are and you live where you say you live to even get into the system to register. The difference is the list of things that you can use to show either or both of those is pretty long and pretty flexible. It's not limited to a government-issued photo ID, though a large majority do use that. There's some people who don't, and some people who might have one of those things, but it doesn't correspond to their current address. My own family members have had that situation. And so because of the larger sort of array of laws that we have to help people, I think we've gotten to a good place. And by the way, we've gotten to a place not only where we have that access, but also the security. The incidence in Minnesota of voter fraud or voter misconduct is really, truly microscopic. It really is, going back many, many years. And that, I think, owes in large part to the laws that we have, both on access and on security. So that's the good news.
Great. Thank you for that. One final question. We talked a little bit about the different races that are on the ballot. Is there anything else on the ballot, like a constitutional amendment?
Yes, there is one item on the ballot that people will be voting for, and it's really sort of a renewal. Some time ago, more than 2.5 decades ago, Minnesota passed a constitutional amendment that dedicated a portion of lottery proceeds to the outdoors and so forth, but it has to come up for renewal. So now is that renewal time. So it's really just renewing something in our Constitution that Minnesota voters once said that they were for, and that's up to every individual voter. I'm not telling folks how to vote, but that's basically what it is. But that's really the only item that's going to be on the ballot that's going to be a focal point like that.
Great. Well, we have covered a lot of ground tonight, and it looks like we are coming to the near the end of our time with Secretary Simon, and we so appreciate it. We appreciate all of you who are on the phone who have joined us for this very important discussion about the 2024 election. And before we go, I just want to give you one more opportunity to share a few thoughts about the upcoming election and just kind of some reminders that maybe folks need to keep in mind?
Yeah, well, again, I want to thank AARP. This organization has been just such a superstar over the years, so consistently, and done this so professionally and so well. So I want to thank the organization, its members, and all of you who have participated in this town hall meeting. As I said at the beginning, we have 35 days. That is it. That's not a lot of time. But fortunately, in Minnesota, we don't make voting an obstacle course. In fact, for eligible voters, we make it pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and I would say pretty easy. So I urge folks to make a plan to vote. You don't have to do it this minute or this second, but give some thought and attention to whether you want to vote in person. It sounds like on this call, at this town hall meeting, a pretty large majority does want to do that, but you never know. You might change your mind. You might decide you want to vote from your couch or your kitchen table by ordering the ballot to come to you, or you just want to avoid the election day sort of hustle and bustle or whatever it is and go in physically early to vote in person. Those are your options. Those are the items that are on the menu, so to speak. And I urge you, if you have any questions about what or who is on the ballot, or your eligibility, or where you should vote, or any of those things, to contact our office. You can either go to the website, which is mnvotes.gov, or you can call a real live human being. And we've staffed up significantly in this last bit of the election, in this home stretch. So we have plenty of people you can talk to. You're going to talk to a real human being. And that number again is 877-600-VOTE, 877-600-VOTE, or 8683. Thanks for this opportunity. I hope we have an election that is safe, fair, accurate, and secure. It's what Minnesotans expect, and I think it's what we're going to be able to deliver. Thanks.
Well, thank you for being with us tonight, and thanks to all of you on the phone. We appreciate that you joined us for this telephone town hall to talk about the 2024 election coming up on Tuesday, November 5th. Now, if we didn't get to your question, we apologize for that. It's hard to squeeze everything in, but we do encourage you to reach out directly to the Secretary of State's office if you have questions about how to cast a ballot, either in person or by mail, at mnvotes.org, or call 877-600-VOTE. Again, that's mnvotes.gov, or 1-877-600-VOTE. You can also find valuable information about the upcoming election at aarp.org/mnvotes. That is aarp.org/mnvotes. We hope this call was helpful to everyone. We appreciate everyone's time and participation. And thank you, and have a good night. This concludes our call.